Adiz was born into a house built not just with brick and wood, but with stories. Old stories, gilded ones, polished until the truth no longer shone. The walls of the Adjoa estate were thick with portraits of powerful ancestors, each hung above plaques of exaggerated deeds. "We come from strength," her mother would often say, tilting Adiz's chin up with two manicured fingers. "We do not speak weakness into the air." But Adiz was born with a voice that didn't know how to lie. Even as a child, her questions scraped against the grain of the household. Why is Uncle Nana never invited anymore? Why did Papa's first wife disappear? Why does the gardener cry when he thinks no one sees? And always, her mother would answer with that same frozen smile, "Some things are not meant to be said out loud." The Adjoa legacy stretched back 6 generations, with influence woven into courts, universities, churches, and parliament. The family name was synonymous with propriety, grace, and impeccable silence. Adiz's mother, Madame Igioma, ruled the household with the softness of velvet and the precision of a scalpel. Her word was scripture. Her smile doctrine. No one crossed her, not the servants, not her siblings, not even her husband, who had long ago learned to speak only in her presence when spoken to. But Adiz's tongue was different. It pulsed with truth like a vein. It ached to unravel what was tightly wound. And though she learned to whisper her curiosities in shadows, she could never let them die. The night everything changed was the night of the ancestral feast. Every year the family gathered to honor their lineage, tables stacked with steaming jollof rice, grilled plantains, goat pepper soup, and the finest palm wine. Elders in regal wrappers and headscarves toasted to the name Adjoa. Children were made to recite the family motto, "In silence we reign." Adiz, in her crisp orange gown, sat beside her mother like a well-dressed question mark. Her eyes flicked from the chandeliers to the framed family tree that loomed over the room. She'd stared at that tree for years. She'd memorized every name. And she knew without question that 2 were missing. "Excuse me," she said, standing. She was 12, small for her age, but her voice cut like flint on stone. "I think there's a mistake." Chairs shifted. Silverware paused. Her mother looked up slowly, smile stitched in place. "The family tree is missing names," Adiz continued. 2 names. Daughters. They were sisters of Grandpa Uche. They died in the fire on the northern compound. I read it in the journals you locked in the attic. Silence hit the room like a blow. No one talks about them. No one even says their names. But they were family too. The silence stretched, thick as boiled yam. Her mother stood, graceful, dignified. "Adiz," she said sweetly, "come with me." No one dared protest. No one made eye contact as the girl followed her mother out of the dining room and down the marble hallways that led to the private quarters. The door to Madame Igioma's chamber closed with the finality of a tomb. Adiz remembered the softness of the bed beneath her knees, the glint of moonlight on the ceremonial knife above the fireplace. Her mother did not raise her voice. She did not curse. She merely pressed a damp cloth to Adiz's face and said, "You have no idea how much I love you." And then came the pain, swift, blinding, deep. A slice. A silence. A flood of blood and horror. Adiz screamed, but no sound came out. Only air. Only gasps. Madame Igioma cradled her afterward, humming a lullaby in a voice so gentle it might have belonged to a saint. She wrapped the wound with silken gauze and whispered, "Your voice was too dangerous, my child. Now no one will twist your truth against the family." Adiz could not cry. The pain was too large for tears. The next morning, the servants were told she'd had a tragic accident with glass. No one questioned it. No one asked. That was the way of things in the Adjoa house. Truth only lived as long as it remained convenient. But Adiz's silence was not still. It moved. It echoed. It haunted. She no longer needed words to draw attention. Her gaze alone silenced rooms. Her footsteps became prayers. When she entered a space, servants dropped their eyes. Her brothers stopped their boasting. The very air around her tightened, as if bracing for something unspeakable. Her mother dressed her in brighter clothes, brought in tutors for sign language, gifted her ornate notebooks as if to apologize, but the damage had taken root. Adiz wrote nothing. She signed nothing. She stared at everyone with a mouth that could not lie anymore, and that was more dangerous than speech. The family began to avoid her. Her cousins stopped visiting. Guests no longer asked for her to play piano. And still her presence could not be erased. During the ancestral rites, the incense drifted toward her even as she stood in the shadows. The family tree creaked on the wall whenever she passed beneath it. Her silence began to peel the polish from the Adjoa name. Late at night, she sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the journal she had stolen from the attic, the one that belonged to the sister who burned. Her fingers traced the ink, the loops of a girl who had once dreamed of escaping the compound. A girl whose name had been wiped from history. Adiz pressed her palm against the page and let her breath go slow. Some nights, she thought she heard whispers in the room, soft, womanly voices speaking in languages older than the ones taught at school. One voice sounded like her grandmother's lullabies. Another felt like fire on skin. The voices never asked for anything. They only spoke truth. That was when Adiz realized something that turned her silence into power. She was not alone. The house that had silenced her had also become her witness. The truth could not be cut out, not when it had soaked into the floorboards, the mirrors, the bones of the walls. It was waiting, watching, gathering. She stopped trying to speak. Instead, she learned to listen. She walked barefoot through corridors, feeling vibrations with her soles. She stared into reflections and saw flickers of things behind her, shadows that moved when no one was there. When her aunt tried to poison the head servant for knowing too much, Adiz stood beside the woman's bed until the truth unraveled in her aunt's sleep. When her older cousin lied about where the family funds had gone, the lights in the room went out the moment he spoke. Adiz didn't lift a hand. She only watched. Her silence had become a mirror, a force, a presence. But Madame Igioma did not relent. She continued her rituals, her false charities, her public appearances with Adiz at her side, the perfect image of resilience and grace. She lost her voice, she would say, stroking her daughter's hair, but never her spirit. Inside, Adiz laughed, a laugh that made the windows tremble. No one could hear it, but the house did. The house laughed with her. One day, her mother found Adiz standing in front of the family tree again. The girl's hand hovered just beneath the engraved names. She wasn't pointing, just feeling, breathing. They were weak, her mother said behind her. They didn't know when to stop. And weakness cannot survive in this family. Adiz turned slowly, her mouth sealed, her eyes unblinking. And in that moment, her mother faltered. For the first time in her life, Madame Igioma took a step back. The house had always been too large, its ceilings too high for warmth, its windows too wide for privacy. After Adiz lost her tongue, it felt larger still, like the very walls were echoing her silence back at her. She could not scream. She could not whisper. Even crying made no sound now, only the raw convulsions of her chest and the wet trails down her face. At 12 years old, she had been rendered a ghost in her own home. Her mother pretended nothing had happened. At breakfast, she poured tea with the same elegant flick of her wrist, asked if the servants had scrubbed the floors and commented on the weather. She never looked directly at Adiz. Neither did her sisters, who sat still and proper, their backs straight and their eyes fixed on their plates as if they feared that one glance might infect them with disobedience. The family doctor, who'd arrived in the night and stitched Adiz's mouth shut with trembling hands, had already disappeared by morning. No one asked questions. That was how things worked in their house. "You'll get used to it," her eldest sister had whispered once as they passed in the corridor. "Better this than buried like Aunt Ifinanya." Then she was gone, slipping into a sitting room, the door closing softly behind her. For weeks, Adiz wandered the house in a haze of pain and confusion. Her mouth throbbed with every heartbeat. She couldn't eat solid food. Broths were left in a blue porcelain bowl outside her room, and when she was lucky, someone remembered to add honey. Mostly she fed on the air, dry and heavy with perfume and secrets. But slowly her other senses sharpened. With speech taken from her, she began to see more than others did. At first it was just feelings. She could tell when a servant was lying before a word was spoken. Their eyes twitched toward the left. Their hands clenched too tightly around the tray. Then it became something deeper, scratches in the wooden banisters shaped like names, faint outlines of doors that hadn't been opened in years, and mirrors that shimmered like water when certain lies were spoken nearby. One afternoon, in the great salon where the family held parties for important guests, she saw the fireplace shimmer, just slightly like heat where there was none. She stepped closer, and her reflection in the marble surface smiled at her. Not the thin, weak smile she could still manage, but a full, proud grin, tongue intact. She stumbled backward and fled the room. From that day on she avoided mirrors. It was during her walks in the garden that the crow began to appear. At first it perched far off, on the twisted arm of the old fig tree near the koi pond. It never cawed. Never flapped wildly like the others. It just stared, beady eyes glinting like tiny glass beads in the sunlight. But every time she returned it was closer. After a week, it was hopping beside her heels, cocking its head as if in conversation. Adiz began to look forward to its company. When she sat beneath the frangipani tree, it would perch on the lowest branch and tilt its head, almost as if listening to the thoughts she could no longer say aloud. Sometimes she would mouth words to it, not full sentences, just names or feelings or questions she didn't understand. The bird never answered, but she sensed it understood. It followed her indoors sometimes too when the doors were left open. Her mother would swat it away, screaming curses about filth and disease, but the bird never feared her. It would wait just beyond the windows watching. And then the dreams began. At first they were strange and garbled. She stood in a corridor filled with doors, each one marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Behind each door came sounds, footsteps, voices, gasps, but she couldn't open them. Her hands would melt into air when she tried. Then the dream sharpened. She saw a woman in white standing over her own bed, weeping silently, blood running from her mouth like ink. She saw a locked trunk at the foot of her mother's bed, glowing faintly with something hot inside. And most often she saw the crow perched atop a crumbling tombstone, cawing not in warning but in mourning. Sometimes the voices in her dreams weren't human. Sometimes they whispered like wind between reeds, like the fluttering of silk. They never said her name, but they knew her. They told her things. That the house had long been full of mouths sealed shut. That her mother had once cried too, though no one saw it. That truth once swallowed can still rot inside a family. Adiz began to explore the house at night. When the rest of the family was asleep, she moved barefoot through the corridors. The crow often flew silently ahead, leading her to strange places. One night she found herself in the attic, dusty, choking with old fabric and moths. She tripped over a bundle of cloth and found it was a dress, yellowed with age, with a name stitched in the hem, Ifyananya. Her aunt. She hadn't been buried then. At least not completely. No one had ever spoken of what happened to her, only that she had gone abroad, and never returned. But Adiz had seen her in dreams now, saw the red running from her mouth, the way her hands gripped at nothing as she was pulled backward into shadow. The next day Adiz carried the dress and laid it across her bed. Her mother came into the room minutes later. Her eyes darkened as she saw it. She didn't speak at first. Just walked forward and picked up the dress like it was made of knives. "You're not allowed to touch this," she said sharply. Adiz stared back, unblinking. Her mother gripped the dress tighter. She was ill. "Mad, don't let her ghosts poison your silence." Adiz didn't move. The crow landed on the balcony railing. Her mother noticed, flinched, then dropped the dress and left the room. That night, the fireplace in her mother's bedroom refused to light. The water in the bath turned black. And the next morning, Adiz noticed cracks in the large mirror above the staircase. Just fine lines, barely visible, but spreading outward like veins. The silence in the house became unbearable. The servants whispered behind closed doors. Her sisters began looking at her with wide, fearful eyes. Her mother snapped at everyone more often, her voice rising in shrill bursts. One afternoon she slapped a maid across the mouth for speaking too loudly. Another time she broke a china plate just because it had been arranged wrong. But through it all, Adiz remained quiet. Only her eyes spoke now, calm, heavy, and too knowing for a girl her age. One day she walked through the dining hall and passed by her father. She mouthed his name, not aloud, just formed it with her lips. He blinked, rubbed his temples and muttered, "What was I saying?" Then he laughed awkwardly and shook his head. Must be the heat. It wasn't. Her silence had begun to fill the gaps between every lie in the house. She could feel it like a pressure, like something building beneath the floors. When she touched the walls they felt warmer. When she stood too close to a closed door, she could hear what was behind it without hearing. She could feel it. The silence inside her was growing larger than the house itself. And every night, the crow watched with eyes that never blinked. Adiz no longer needed words. She only needed time. The hallway that led to the western wing of the house was warped by age. Its walls bowed slightly inward, its floorboards sighed with every step, and cobwebs spun undisturbed above doorways that hadn't been opened in decades. Adiz had walked past this hallway for years, always told it was simply unfinished, or unsafe, or not for little girls. But now, with no tongue in her mouth and no trust in her heart, she no longer listened to rules whispered in honeyed lies. It was the crow that led her there, again. The same black-feathered creature that had followed her ever since the blood dried on her chin and her mother stitched her lips with silence. It had watched her from windowsills and rafters, from tree branches and the backs of chairs. Now it glided down the hallway without a sound and vanished through the last door. That door was different. It bore no handle, just a faded carving of a woman's face, so worn it was little more than an impression. Her eyes were wide open, mouth sealed shut. Beneath it the wood seemed darker, scorched. Adiz touched the burn mark. It was cold. She should have turned back. But her hands had become braver than her body. She pressed her fingers into the seam of the door, and to her surprise, it creaked open with the sound of paper tearing. The room inside was thick with dust. Sunlight filtered in through a single narrow window, revealing floating specks like ash suspended mid-air. The walls were lined with portraits, tall ones that stretched nearly from floor to ceiling, women in regal dresses, heads held high. But not a single one had a mouth. Some were smoothed away by age, others scratched out deliberately, violently. One had a smear of charcoal where lips should have been, as if someone had tried to redraw them and given up. The hair on Adiz's arms stood on end. Each woman stared directly at her, their painted eyes following as she stepped deeper into the room. The crow landed on the windowsill and ruffled its feathers, quiet as always. In the corner of the room, partly covered by a tattered velvet drape, was a writing desk. Not the polished mahogany her mother kept in the study, but a plain, splintering thing. On it lay an open journal, pages gray with charcoal script. The handwriting was hurried, scrawled by someone afraid of time, of discovery. Adiz approached it slowly. She sat. The seat creaked beneath her, but the sound was comforting. Real. She began to read. The first page began, "They say silence is power. But they do not speak of the weight of it." The entries were not dated, only signed with single initials, M, B, D, E, Z. Women who had once lived here. Women of the same family. Their words peeled back generations of rot, secrets buried beneath silk and ceremony. One spoke of a child burned for naming her rapist. Another wrote of a sister locked away for exposing theft in the family's treasury. Another described how her own tongue was split, not removed, so I might still sing but never speak. Adiz read until her eyes blurred. She turned the pages gently, reverently, as if disturbing the paper might release their trapped grief. In the middle of the journal was a loose scrap of parchment. It bore only a phrase repeated 3 times in a shaky, childlike script. Asterisk, we still speak. We still speak. We still speak. Asterisk. Adiz pressed the paper to her chest. Her heart beat like a drum. In that moment the silence in the room shifted. Not broke. Shifted. It pressed against her ears like water, like sound wanting to return. She looked around. The women in the portrait seemed closer now, their eyes more intense. The crow hopped once on the windowsill, then flew across the room to land on the desk. Adiz reached for the journal again, but it was no longer just charcoal script. New words were appearing, written slowly, one at a time in the same smudged black. Asterisk. You are not the first, but you must be the last. Asterisk. Her breath caught in her throat. Her body stiffened. Asterisk. This house feeds on silence. You have broken it. Asterisk. Then the writing stopped. Adiz stared at the final sentence, her hands trembling. She closed the journal gently and looked again at the portraits. A faint noise echoed in her skull, not from outside but inside her bones. It was not a voice but a pressure, a pulse, a presence. She stood and turned to the back wall. Unlike the others, it was not decorated. It was plain, made of a darker wood. She reached out and touched it. To her shock, the wood flexed beneath her fingers. It was soft, almost alive. Behind her the crow cawed once, sharp, urgent. Adiz pressed her palm harder. The wall hissed and opened slightly like skin parting for a blade. Inside was a narrow alcove, no more than a coffin's width, with a mirror at the far end. She stepped inside. The mirror was old. Its surface rippled like water, and it reflected not what stood before it, but what had come before. Behind her, in the reflection, stood the women from the portraits. One by one they placed their fingers to their lips, not in shushing but in solidarity. Then they pointed at Adiz. Then at her throat. She nodded. Her throat still ached, her mouth still empty. But she had the journal. She had the names. She had the truth. She stepped back into the room. The crow took flight again, circling once before gliding back out the open door. The silence behind her deepened once more, but this time it was not empty. It held purpose. Witness. Go. Adiz exited the room and closed the door gently behind her. By the time she returned to the main part of the house, evening had settled. Candles flickered in alcoves, casting long shadows that danced like silent figures. Her mother passed her in the hallway, speaking low with one of the priests. She glanced once at Adiz, eyes narrowing, but said nothing. Adiz said nothing too. She simply looked at her, long enough for her mother to pause. Later that night, Adiz returned to her room. She slipped the journal under a loose floorboard and stared at the ceiling. Her ears rang with voices she could not name. Her dreams were full of portraits weeping, full of mouths rediscovered. And in the mirror across from her bed, the eyes of the crow shone red in the candlelight. She was no longer just a girl with a missing tongue. She was a key. And the door had been opened. The crow came again that morning. It landed on the ledge outside Adiz's shuttered window, black wings tucked tight against the pale dawn. It didn't caw or scratch. It just waited, head tilted, its bright, unnatural eyes watching her as she sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, weaving a bit of frayed curtain thread between her fingers. Her mouth, still healing from what had been taken, throbbed dully, not from pain anymore but from memory. Her mother no longer looked her in the face. Her sisters passed her in the hallways like she was part of the drapery. And when guests came, they were instructed not to ask about the youngest daughter, or worse, to pretend she never existed at all. But the crow came. Every morning now. Sometimes it brought things. Today, it dropped a thin length of blue silk, once part of a hair ribbon, now stained with something dark. Adiz took it gently. The crow hopped once, then flew away. It left her with no answers, only this small clue. There had been others. A rusted needle. A piece of parchment with half a name scratched in ash. A broken button from a soldier's coat. But the most peculiar had been the small, brass key she found 2 nights before. The crow had dropped it right onto her lap and flown off without even looking back. The key was warm in her hands and shaped like a vine, twisted, strange, almost soft to the touch. Adiz had hidden it under her pillow, unsure what to do with it. Until now. The east wing was always cold. No one lived there anymore. Dust lived where people didn't. Silence pooled in the corners like water. Adiz moved carefully, barefoot and unnoticed, past the heavy velvet curtains and cracked portraits of forgotten uncles. She knew where the chest was. She had seen it in one of the dreams, the ones that came on nights she slept without fear. It was tucked into the attic of a long-abandoned dressing room, sealed behind rotting boxes and collapsed hat racks. She crawled over them, ignoring the dust in her nose and the cobwebs in her hair, until she reached it. It was smaller than she expected, barely wide enough for a doll's cradle. The lock was old and mottled with green. But when she fit the key into the hole, it clicked open as if the chest had only been sleeping. Inside lay a candle. Just a candle. Smooth and pale, twisted like a spine. It sat in a bowl of salt and peppercorns. Adiz reached for it and felt her fingers buzz with something cold and golden, something like a whisper running along her bones. The moment her skin brushed the wax, the wick burst into flame. But the flame didn't flicker. It didn't dance. It hummed. A low, almost melodic vibration. A sound she didn't hear with her ears but with her ribs, her chest, the curve of her back. She held the candle high. The flame didn't move with the air. It stretched forward like it had sight. The crow returned at dusk. Adiz was waiting. The candle flickered once, not from the wind but from recognition. She brought it first to her sister Amara's room. Amara sat brushing her hair by candlelight, a mirror propped against the vanity. When Adiz entered, the elder sister barely looked up, just muttered, "Go away, ghost," as if the presence of her silent sibling was no more than an unwanted draft. Adiz held up the humming candle. At first nothing happened. Then Amara's reflection shifted. It shimmered. The smooth skin rippled like water. The eyes in the mirror narrowed, not in annoyance but in cruelty. Then the mouth widened, not into a smile but a smirk. Her face changed entirely. Something beneath the beauty showed, something spoiled, ravenous, mean. Amara did not see it. Only Adiz saw the true face revealed in the flame. She fled before her sister turned to catch her watching. She brought the candle next to Ifyananya, the middle sister, who always walked as if she wore a crown. Ifyananya sat in the prayer room, lips moving silently in the half-light. The candle revealed her true face too, not just in the mirror but in the walls. Her cheeks stretched too wide. Her eyes bled ink. The room darkened, not from smoke but from memory. Adiz remembered it then, the day Ifyananya had drowned the house cat in a bucket for tearing her favorite shawl. She'd lied to their mother, said it ran away. The candle seemed to pull that memory forward, hold it up to the light. The reflection of Ifyananya hissed. Adiz backed away again. And finally, the next night, she went to her mother. The matriarch sat alone in her chamber, sipping wine and staring at a fire that never warmed. Her beauty had grown brittle with power. Her silence was deep, but not like Adiz. It was the silence of someone who thought herself beyond consequence. Adiz did not knock. She opened the door and stepped inside. Her mother turned, startled, then scowled. "I told them not to let you in here," she snapped. Adiz did not answer. Could not. She only stepped forward and raised the candle. At first her mother sneered. "What childish thing is this now? What game do you?" Then the flame stretched. It reached for the older woman's face like a hand. The light curled upward, down the bridge of her nose, across her jaw. And the skin began to burn. Not with fire. With truth. Her mother's face blackened, not in pain but in confession. Her features began to smoke, melt, shift, until there was no face left at all. Only a dark mask. A hollow mouth. A thing that could not speak truth because it had never spoken anything else. Her mother gasped, dropped her cup and screamed. But her scream was silent. For a moment they stared at one another, daughter and mother, silence and smoke, past and reckoning. Then Adiz turned and walked away. She left the candle burning on the floor. That night the crow landed on her pillow again. It held something in its beak, not a ribbon or key or scrap this time. It was a feather, not its own but white. Unmarked. Pure. The crow dropped it into her hand and did not fly away. Adiz knew what it meant. She returned to the attic chest and found the bottom was deeper than before. The candle had sunk into the salt. In its place was a mirror, small, circular, framed in bone. When she looked into it, her face did not reflect back. Instead, she saw the faces of all the silenced daughters who had lived before her. Their eyes open, their mouths still, their truths buried. But now their mouths were moving again. Not with sound but with flame. Adiz closed her eyes and pressed the white feather to her tongue. It didn't hurt. It didn't heal. But it changed her. When she opened her lips again, no words came. But something else did. A single curl of smoke. And through it, faint, crackling, eternal, a voice spoke. Not her mother's. Not her sister's. But hers. And the house, which had buried so many secrets beneath its fine walls, began slowly to listen. The crow came again that morning. It landed on the ledge outside Adiz's shuttered window, black wings tucked tight against the pale dawn. It didn't caw or scratch. It just waited, head tilted, its bright, unnatural eyes watching her as she sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, weaving a bit of frayed curtain thread between her fingers. Her mouth, still healing from what had been taken, throbbed dully, not from pain anymore but from memory. Her mother no longer looked her in the face. Her sisters passed her in the hallways like she was part of the drapery. And when guests came, they were instructed not to ask about the youngest daughter, or worse, to pretend she never existed at all. But the crow came. Every morning now. Sometimes it brought things. Today, it dropped a thin length of blue silk, once part of a hair ribbon, now stained with something dark. Adiz took it gently. The crow hopped once, then flew away. It left her with no answers, only this small clue. There had been others. A rusted needle. A piece of parchment with half a name scratched in ash. A broken button from a soldier's coat. But the most peculiar had been the small, brass key she found 2 nights before. The crow had dropped it right onto her lap and flown off without even looking back. The key was warm in her hands and shaped like a vine, twisted, strange, almost soft to the touch. Adiz had hidden it under her pillow, unsure what to do with it. Until now. The east wing was always cold. No one lived there anymore. Dust lived where people didn't. Silence pooled in the corners like water. Adiz moved carefully, barefoot and unnoticed, past the heavy velvet curtains and cracked portraits of forgotten uncles. She knew where the chest was. She had seen it in one of the dreams, the ones that came on nights she slept without fear. It was tucked into the attic of a long-abandoned dressing room, sealed behind rotting boxes and collapsed hat racks. She crawled over them, ignoring the dust in her nose and the cobwebs in her hair, until she reached it. It was smaller than she expected, barely wide enough for a doll's cradle. The lock was old and mottled with green. But when she fit the key into the hole, it clicked open as if the chest had only been sleeping. Inside lay a candle. Just a candle. Smooth and pale, twisted like a spine. It sat in a bowl of salt and peppercorns. Adiz reached for it and felt her fingers buzz with something cold and golden, something like a whisper running along her bones. The moment her skin brushed the wax, the wick burst into flame. But the flame didn't flicker. It didn't dance. It hummed. A low, almost melodic vibration. A sound she didn't hear with her ears but with her ribs, her chest, the curve of her back. She held the candle high. The flame didn't move with the air. It stretched forward like it had sight. The crow returned at dusk. Adiz was waiting. The candle flickered once, not from the wind but from recognition. She brought it first to her sister Amara's room. Amara sat brushing her hair by candlelight, a mirror propped against the vanity. When Adiz entered, the elder sister barely looked up, just muttered, "Go away, ghost," as if the presence of her silent sibling was no more than an unwanted draft. Adiz held up the humming candle. At first nothing happened. Then Amara's reflection shifted. It shimmered. The smooth skin rippled like water. The eyes in the mirror narrowed, not in annoyance but in cruelty. Then the mouth widened, not into a smile but a smirk. Her face changed entirely. Something beneath the beauty showed, something spoiled, ravenous, mean. Amara did not see it. Only Adiz saw the true face revealed in the flame. She fled before her sister turned to catch her watching. She brought the candle next to Ifyananya, the middle sister, who always walked as if she wore a crown. Ifyananya sat in the prayer room, lips moving silently in the half-light. The candle revealed her true face too, not just in the mirror but in the walls. Her cheeks stretched too wide. Her eyes bled ink. The room darkened, not from smoke but from memory. Adiz remembered it then, the day Ifyananya had drowned the house cat in a bucket for tearing her favorite shawl. She'd lied to their mother, said it ran away. The candle seemed to pull that memory forward, hold it up to the light. The reflection of Ifyananya hissed. Adiz backed away again. And finally, the next night, she went to her mother. The matriarch sat alone in her chamber, sipping wine and staring at a fire that never warmed. Her beauty had grown brittle with power. Her silence was deep, but not like Adiz. It was the silence of someone who thought herself beyond consequence. Adiz did not knock. She opened the door and stepped inside. Her mother turned startled, then scowled. "I told them not to let you in here," she snapped. Adiz did not answer. Could not. She only stepped forward and raised the candle. At first her mother sneered. "What childish thing is this now? What game do you?" Then the flame stretched. It reached for the older woman's face like a hand. The light curled upward, down the bridge of her nose, across her jaw. And the skin began to burn. Not with fire. With truth. Her mother's face blackened, not in pain but in confession. Her features began to smoke, melt, shift, until there was no face left at all. Only a dark mask. A hollow mouth. A thing that could not speak truth because it had never spoken anything else. Her mother gasped, dropped her cup and screamed. But her scream was silent. For a moment they stared at one another, daughter and mother, silence and smoke, past and reckoning. Then Adiz turned and walked away. She left the candle burning on the floor. That night the crow landed on her pillow again. It held something in its beak, not a ribbon or key or scrap this time. It was a feather, not its own but white. Unmarked. Pure. The crow dropped it into her hand and did not fly away. Adiz knew what it meant. She returned to the attic chest and found the bottom was deeper than before. The candle had sunk into the salt. In its place was a mirror, small, circular, framed in bone. When she looked into it, her face did not reflect back. Instead, she saw the faces of all the silenced daughters who had lived before her. Their eyes open, their mouths still, their truths buried. But now their mouths were moving again. Not with sound but with flame. Adiz closed her eyes and pressed the white feather to her tongue. It didn't hurt. It didn't heal. But it changed her. When she opened her lips again, no words came. But something else did. A single curl of smoke. And through it, faint, crackling, eternal, a voice spoke. Not her mother's. Not her sister's. But hers. And the house, which had buried so many secrets beneath its fine walls, began slowly to listen. The candle had become her secret. Adiz lit it only when alone, only after drawing the heavy curtains and placing a cloth at the base of her door to keep out the flickering light. It wasn't ordinary. The flame didn't tremble with the wind or lean with breath. It stood straight, like a spine that had never known fear. She would sit cross-legged before it, its hum vibrating softly in her chest, and stare into the golden blue that licked upward without consuming. That evening, the rain knocked gently on the windows of the east wing, like someone forgotten asking to be remembered. Adiz slipped into the old room again, past the rotting velvet drapes and peeling wood that creaked like old bones under her steps. The portraits on the walls had once terrified her. Dozens of women with severe eyes and mouths either missing or blurred into smudges of paint. Some were full-figured, dressed in coral and gold. Others were pale ghosts in charcoal robes. But all were silent. She placed the candle in the center of the cold marble floor and lit it. The light pushed outward like breath on glass. The room thickened. A pressure settled into her ears like the moment before thunder. Then it began, not with a voice but with a pulse. The portraits shimmered faintly. The mouths, painted shut, began to twitch. One by one lips appeared. Then sound. A murmur rose from the walls, the low chorus of women long erased. Not screams. Not wails. But words. Adi's heart pounded. She clutched her chest. She didn't know whether to cry or kneel. The voices came from the paint, yes, but they also came from the air, the floor, the very stone of the house. "Child," said one voice, soft but raw, "you burn without fire." "She's seen the seal," hissed another. "She walks where her mother walks, but does not lie." A third was gentler. "Little one, your silence holds more danger than your voice ever did. Use it wisely." Adi's mouth trembled. She couldn't answer. Her tongue was gone. Her voice was somewhere beyond bone. But they didn't need her words. "She hears us," said one. "She always could." In the corner, one portrait began to weep. Actual tears welled in the paint, streaking down the canvas, pooling at the frame. The face was young, barely older than Adi's, with soft round cheeks and eyes like hers. "Don't let her seal it again," the painted girl whispered. "Destroy it. Break the wax." Suddenly the candle flickered, for the first time. Something was coming. Adi's breath caught. Footsteps echoed from the hall. She doused the flame and grabbed the candle, bolting from the room, heart thudding so loudly she thought the portraits would shout. Behind her, the door slammed shut by itself. Down the corridor, her mother stood still. Dressed in black. No jewelry. No smile. Just eyes that knew too much. "What were you doing in there?" Her voice was calm, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. Adi's held up her hands. She couldn't lie. Couldn't explain. Couldn't do anything but stand there, candle pressed to her chest, trying not to shake. Her mother's eyes dropped to the candle. They narrowed. "Where did you find that?" Adi said nothing. Her silence was her only shield now. But something in her mother's face changed. Not fear. Not anger. Something tired. "I should have burned it," the matriarch muttered, half to herself. "Like I burned the tongues of the others." Others? Adi's knees wobbled. She felt dizzy. The silence she carried wasn't just hers. Her mother had done this before, to others. Maybe all those portraits weren't just symbolically muted. Maybe they had once lived, once spoken, once screamed. "You're not to go near the east wing again," her mother snapped. "That part of the house is closed. Do you hear me?" Adi's didn't nod. Didn't move. Her mother's hand raised, not to hit, but to point. "Go." That night, Adi's didn't sleep. The journal she'd found in the locked chest lay open on her lap. Names. Dates. Accusations. Betrayals. Generations of women silenced under the guise of family pride. She turned each page with shaking hands, recognizing familiar handwriting now. Her grandmother's, great-aunt's, even some entries in a jagged ink that looked like it had been written in pain. And there it was, a mention of the seal. Asterisk, to preserve legacy the mouth must close. The seal, once placed on the tongue or truth, must not be broken lest the house fall with it. Asterisk. Adi's leaned back against the wall. Her heart ached with rage. With grief. She would never speak again, but somehow that had made her louder than all the lies combined. By morning her mother had locked the east wing completely. No keys. No access. Guards posted at night. The candle she had stashed away in a small cavity behind her bed. She didn't light it again, not yet. But she watched. She waited. She studied her mother's movements, her sister's silences, the crow's path across the rooftops. The house was beginning to change. Whispers curled from vents. Mirrors showed flickers not her own. The smell of smoke lingered in unused rooms. The past was not resting. One night, the crow tapped on her window again 3 times. Adi's followed it down the staircase, barefoot and careful. Past the great hall. Past the sealed doors. To the family chapel. Inside was a small altar, gold wood glass. And beneath it, a scroll tied in black ribbon. She knew what it was before she touched it. The family seal. It pulsed faintly when she picked it up, like a heart. The portraits had begged her to destroy it. She stared at it for what felt like hours. Then, slowly she pulled the ribbon free. A crack. A groan. The house shuddered. Somewhere, a painting fell from the wall. Glass shattered in an upper corridor. The wind howled inside the house though no door had opened. And down the hallway her mother screamed. Adi stood in the chapel, eyes shining, breath steady. The candle was still behind her bed. And the silence was just beginning to speak. The air was thick with perfume and the clatter of silver as the family gathered under the long roof of the ancestral dining hall. The table stretched impossibly far, dressed in satin runners and bowls of imported fruit, Meat steaming in carved dishes, wine as dark as secrets poured without pause. It was the annual feast, not for harvest, not for any known holiday, but for remembering the family name and how it rose. Adiz stepped through the far archway and all conversation froze. She wore robes that shimmered like dusk, deep purple trimmed with gold thread. They were unmistakable, the robes of her grandmother, once the family matriarch, hidden away after her sudden death. No one had seen them in years. No one had dared wear them. Adiz walked slowly, her bare feet silent on the stone. In her hand was the small candle that hummed instead of flickered. The guests stared at it, unblinking, drawn to the low vibration that buzzed not just in ears but in bones. Her sisters exchanged glances. One of them whispered something to their cousin, but even the whisper carried strangely, as if the room had turned to stone and echo. She made no announcement. She could not. But she didn't need to. One by one she passed each guest. Each glance she cast revealed something new, a quivering lip, a shift in skin, the dull sheen of false teeth that were not false at all. Some faces shimmered, some paled. For a moment, a smile would appear genuine, then twist into a grimace too fast for reason. One uncle's nose stretched, then snapped back. An aunt's eyes blinked backward. The candle didn't lie, it only revealed what was already there. She paused by her second eldest brother. The candlelight hovered near his shoulder. His reflection in the goblet of wine showed a younger version of himself, wild-eyed, with blood on his chin. He turned away, jaw clenched, but Adiz did not flinch. She kept walking. Her mother sat at the head of the table, tall-backed, radiant in red. Rings on every finger, lips painted in the family's trademark maroon, eyes lined in gold. She said nothing, but her hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Adiz walked toward her. The candle grew louder. Guests shifted. The soft murmur of confusion swelled. No one reached for food now. A cousin began to weep quietly. One guest's face had begun to peel, not the skin but the composure. Adiz stopped one step from her mother's seat. The candle's hum became a tone and then a wind, soft but rising. A gust slammed the far window open. Curtains blew inward. The candle flickered once, the first time ever, and then as Adiz looked her mother in the eyes, the flame vanished. Snuffed. Silently. But it was too late. The truth had already escaped. Not shouted, not written, not even gestured. Just breathed. People turned to each other. Words were spoken. Eyes darted across the table. One woman stood and demanded to know why the family had never spoken of the fire that killed her sister. A man near the far end asked why his mother had vanished after marrying into the house. Another woman, shaking, whispered that she could feel someone's hands on her neck even now. Whispers turned to questions. Questions turned to stares. Stares found their way to Adiz's mother, whose face now glistened with sweat, her perfect expression cracking. Adiz did not smile. She did not blink. She simply held the unlit candle and turned. She left the hall slowly, her grandmother's robes trailing like smoke. No one followed her. No one stopped her. But from that day on, the feast was never held again. The long table remained, but it collected dust. Servants whispered of mirrors that refused to show faces. One guest never left. She sat in the corner muttering things no one understood, rocking slowly with wide, dry eyes. And in the family archives, someone scrawled a new note on the final page. She never needed to speak. Only walk. It began with a whisper of glass. Adiz stood in the entry hall, the air dim with dust and history. The great mirror loomed before her, tall as two men, framed in iron carved to resemble vines and flame. It had hung there since before she was born. No one looked at it too long. No one cleaned it with care. It was simply there, a quiet witness to generations of silent arrivals and blood-stained departures. She approached it for the first time since the feast. She had not meant to touch it. Her hand brushed it absently as if drawn by instinct, and the glass cracked beneath her fingers. A single line, then two, then a web crawling outward from where her skin had met its cold face. The sound was sharp, alive, yet no piece fell. The mirror held, but it had changed. Her reflection remained, staring back at her, same solemn face, same robe hanging like a ghost around her frame, but now beside that image was another. It was still her, but not. The second reflection moved differently. It smiled. It opened its mouth. And it spoke. I remember every word you never said. Adiz stepped back, her breath frozen. She did not blink. Her mouth did not move. But the reflection kept speaking. You were 4 when she first slapped you for speaking out of turn. You were 6 when you learned that truth has a cost in blood. You were 8 when you told her you wished to leave, and she sewed your doll's lips shut for a week. Adi's chest rose and fell faster now. Her real body shook. But the reflection remained steady. And you were 13 when she decided your tongue wasn't hers to permit any more. The mirror did not shatter. It pulsed. Servants heard it from the kitchen and came running, but stopped short when they saw her standing before it, her face pale but unflinching, the mirror aglow. They said nothing. They simply looked at her and then at the second girl in the glass. And then they left. Quietly. The next day another servant returned. She stood before the mirror when no one else was watching. Adiz had not moved from the hallway. The girl glanced at her, uncertain, then turned to the mirror. She whispered, "Did he really?" and did not finish. The reflection nodded. That night, the girl wept outside in the rain and burned the shoes she'd worn for 5 years, shoes a certain uncle had gifted her in secret. Word spread. They didn't call it magic. They didn't dare name it at all. But they began to come, one by one, to pass by the mirror when Adiz stood nearby. They would not ask aloud. They would not gesture. But their thoughts rippled in the air, and the second reflection would tilt its head, open its mouth and say what could not be unsaid. She lied. It wasn't your fault. He touched her too. She buried the last girl who said no. The mirror refused to lie. Her mother found out soon after. A boy with trembling hands had told the cook he knew what really happened to his sister, because the mirror girl told him. The cook told the head maid. The maid told no one, but the head of the house had always known how to hear what went unsaid. She stormed into the hall that morning in her nightgown and pearls, barefoot and trembling with fury. "You've poisoned them," she hissed, reaching for a fireplace poker. Adiz did not move. The mirror girl smiled. Her mother swung the poker. The glass did not break. It bent. Then it snapped back, slicing the poker in half like it was a twig. Shards did fall this time. Not many, but enough. One piece hit her mother's cheek. Another her hand. She bled quickly, richly, red running down her palm in thin rivers. And in the cracked mirror, her reflection didn't bleed at all. She screamed. "This is blasphemy." Adiz didn't blink. "She's cursing the house." Adiz didn't move. Servants watched from doorways. No one stepped forward. No one stopped her mother. But no one stepped in for her either. Later that night, a single phrase echoed among the staff. "She cannot speak, but truth follows her like a dog." Others whispered, "The mirror doesn't lie. And neither does the girl with no tongue." From that night onward, no one cleaned the glass. And no one dared to cover it. The first name she wrote was Ebel. She did it without rage, without trembling hands. Just 4 letters, drawn carefully in charcoal beside her bed. She laid the stub of black next to it and blew out the candle. When morning came, Ebel, her cousin with the red lacquered nails and a mouth made of honeyed poison, did not rise for breakfast. She was found in her room, pale, sweating, unable to speak. Her body trembled as though some fever burned from within, but no physician could name it. Her mouth tried to form words but nothing came. Adiz said nothing. They didn't connect the sickness to her at first. Why would they? She was the quiet one, the cursed one, the one they all pitied, or feared, but only in passing. Yet when the second name appeared, Chinidu, written in the same delicate black letters on the stone beside her mattress, and the boy was discovered 2 days later coughing blood into a silk napkin, the questions began. "Witchcraft," someone whispered. "She's touched by something." "She doesn't speak," another said. "Perhaps something else speaks for her." But still no one saw her move. No one saw her write. They only found the names, and then the sickness followed. By the 4th name, fear became a rhythm in the house. Rooms fell silent when she entered. Even those who had once tried to be kind turned their eyes away. The halls felt thinner. The mirrors held breath. And all around Adiz the air became sharper, like it knew. She had not planned this. Not at first. The charcoal was not a spell, not in the way the old tales spoke of spells. But each time she pressed the dark tip to stone and shaped a name, only those who had harmed her, who had torn pieces from her without consequence, something listened. And something obeyed. Her mother came for her on the 7th morning. "This ends now," she hissed, flanked by 2 guards with skin too smooth to know loyalty. "You will leave this house. You will go where your shadow cannot reach us." Adiz did not nod. She only sat. Come. Silent. Her mother barked an order and the guards tried the door. It did not open. They tried again. Then another. Then a window. All refused. They brought fire to the hinges. They brought blades to the frame. The house held firm. "She's bound it," her mother said, rage staining her voice. "She's turned the house against us." But it wasn't a spell. Adiz knew. It wasn't witchcraft, not the kind her mother feared. It was truth. It was justice. It was the will of a place long buried under lies, finally rising through its bones. That night no one slept. The names on the floor remained. Each morning another appeared. Not many. Just one. Always one. And always someone who had, at some point, laughed when she bled. And each morning the house grew colder, more still, as if morning itself. No priest would come. The last one had entered the east wing and had not returned. The family crumbled in silence. Some fled, but fell sick the moment they stepped beyond the gates. Others locked themselves in rooms and scrawled prayers on their walls. Her mother came to her a second time, this time alone. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "What do you want?" Adiz looked at her. The candle beside her hummed. Her mother dropped to her knees. "I gave you life," she whispered. The mirror on the far wall flashed. "No," the reflection said. "You stole it." The next morning Adiz woke to silence, a deep, ringing hush. The name beside her bed was her mother's. She didn't weep. She walked the halls, slow and deliberate, while doors whispered open in front of her. Not a hand moved to stop her. The portraits on the wall seemed to lean forward as she passed, as if recognizing their own blood again after so long forgotten. She passed the cracked mirror. It did not speak. It only shimmered, as if satisfied. And so the girl with no tongue stood where a dynasty once reigned, a still center in a house of crumbling lies, and let the truth finish what her voice could not. Long after the house fell into itself, not burned, not buried, just gone, people still walked wide around the land where it once stood. The earth there had a hush to it. Even birds did not sing over the space. Trees bowed away. Grass refused to grow. But stories did. They said the girl had no voice yet heard everything. That her silence echoed louder than screams. That she was born cursed, but it was not a curse she carried. It was a truth so old it split lies apart without ever speaking. The elders warned children not to play near where the great house once stood. But children, being what they are, still crept close, hoping to see the shape of the vanished place. Some claimed they heard music, a low hum like a candle still burning without flame. Others swore they saw footprints appear in the dust and vanish again before anyone followed. And always they spoke of the girl. The one who broke the house of lies. No one remembered her name anymore, but all remembered the silence. The kind that made mothers stop mid-story staring out the window. The kind that made uncles cough and change the subject. It wasn't shame exactly, it was fear. The kind of fear that lingers even when you don't know why. In the market square of a distant village, a merchant once raised his voice to accuse a woman of theft, and suddenly he gasped, clutching his throat, eyes wide with something he couldn't name. He stumbled back and the crowd stepped away from a figure passing by. A girl barefoot. Her eyes steady. Her shadow quiet. She carried nothing but a stub of wax in her hand, glowing faintly though it had no flame. The merchant said nothing more. He never accused anyone again. In another town, a priest declared a child demon-born because she heard voices in her sleep. But his sermon cracked mid-word. He doubled over, coughing. And the church bell began to ring, not by rope or hand, but as if wind had found it from inside. Outside, a woman stood in the rain. Her face unreadable. The candle in her hand hummed like a warning. No one could chase her. No one dared. They didn't know where she slept or if she slept. She was seen once in the forest, her palm pressed to a tree that bloomed in midwinter. Another time in the city square, a judge confessed to a crime no one had accused him of yet. He cried as he named names, all while the silent girl stood at the edge of the crowd, barefoot on stone, candle flickering soundlessly. Whispers began to grow. Some said she was the ghost of a girl wronged. Others said she had become truth itself, no longer human but the shape that truth takes when no one dares speak. One child asked if she was an angel, and his grandmother slapped his hand and whispered, "No, child. She's worse. Angels forgive. She only reveals." In one village, a group of children sat around a fire, daring each other to lie. They said things like, "I never stole the sweets," or, "I didn't break the plate," laughing when nothing happened. But when one girl whispered, "My father never hit me," the candle between them flared, though no one had lit it. Smoke rose and the girl began to cry. Not from pain, but from the sound that followed. Footsteps. Soft. Bare. Coming closer. No one dared look up. By the time they opened their eyes, the candle was dark again. And the girl's mouth trembled open. "He did," she said. "He does." It was the first time she'd ever said it aloud. Some say the girl with no tongue leaves the candle behind in every village she visits. Others say there is only one candle, and it travels with her. No one knows if she eats, or sleeps, or ages. But they know this: she does not speak. She does not forget. And when she walks past, you feel something rise in your throat, something ancient and sharp, like your body remembering a truth it tried to forget. In time, even rulers took heed. A king once issued a decree forbidding mention of her in his court. That very night, he woke to find a candle burning at the foot of his bed. By morning he had fled the palace barefoot. And so the legend grew. Of the girl who had no voice but needed none. Of the house that silenced her and was itself silenced. Of a world that cracked every time she blinked. And somewhere, always somewhere, a child asks their mother, "If I lie, will she come?" And the mother looks out the window into the hush that gathers before storm and answers, "She's already here."